If you're watching live, checking us out on YouTube, or listening on your favorite podcast provider, you are most definitely my people. Welcome to another episode of Botched and Chair Shots. We still have high hopes of delivering quality wrestling content, and if not, we'll sprinkle in plenty of people who know more than I do, so we still get over. I am your host, a chef by trade and work by choice. I am the Will Gray, and joining me tonight is one of the hosts of the Wrestling with the Truth podcast. He is one of our favorite Canadians. He absolutely knows more than I do. He is Mr. BC Hunter. BC, how are you, sir?
Not bad, but I have to qualify. How many Canadians do you actually know?
You and Jay and Warren, and I think that might be it, honestly. So
Jeremy Prophet?
I know Jeremy Prophet. Jeremy Prophet's also Canadian, so that gets me up to 4.
All right, stiff competition there. I'll take it then.
Also joining us tonight, host of the Hill Truth podcast, one of the Smacked Raw brethren, hailing from North Carolina. He's the IWC's favorite Hill, Ted the Hillbilly Hill. Ted, what's up, brother? How are you?
Doing great. Glad to be here.
Also, rounding out the panel is a man who comes with his own disclaimer, and that is the opinions of the Yellow Shoe Guy are his and his alone, and not those of the Smacked Raw Podcast Network or Botched and Chair Shots. Bobby Mack, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing fantastic. I'm enjoying this warm weather in Texas, as you can tell. But yeah, you're ready to go tonight.
And as always, perched upon her iron throne, upon the boss bitch's corner, Miss Alison Siegel. Alison, what's up?
No, not much. Getting over the flu.
The flu was terrible. It hit all 3 of us last week. We missed because of Thanksgiving, but also because literally me, Bobby, and Alison all got the flu at the same time. It was not a fun experience.
I was ready. Rain or shine, I'm here. You guys are the two that backed out.
It's like Michael Jordan in the flu game, only it was the flu episode.
That's right.
Well, since we're here, I always start every episode the same way, and I'm just going to lob it in the air and let whoever wants to run with it first go. What has you pissed off for greatness this week in pro wrestling? What is the one thing that has you the most worked up in the sport?
I'd say how FTR has to split up and do singles matches to get on TV. They're the 2 best guys in AEW, ring-wise, telling story-wise. They're old school. And if they want to get on TV, then they can't step on the little Bucky Boys' shoes. They've got to split up and do a singles match.
I can agree with that for sure. Ted, BC, either one of you got something?
Ed?
Go ahead.
That's actually a good one for Bobby. Yeah, the fact that FTR is not getting title shots. And I don't know about you guys, but I saw the whole thing with the Acclaimed. And does it feel like there's going to be a bit of a pull the shoot on us on that one too? They're saying the second best team in AEW is going to get a title shot on Friday, but they didn't actually name the team. You feel like this is again another tease to FTR getting a title shot, and all of a sudden it's like the Bucks or something like that?
I hope not.
Yeah, I agree. Like the Bucks are back. Omega's back. It's going to go back into how it was, pre CM Punk. And I don't know if I'm the only one that has a jaded memory of that, but I think pre CM Punk pretty much sucked building up to that. And now I think it's going to be back to the old. Jericho's got a spot, and the other 3 are there, and they're going to protect their spots.
But they have Carry On My Wayward Son, and they're baby faces now, Bobby.
They're baby faces to the fans that, like that kind of stuff. I think, Cornette says, the guys that like that kind of stuff, and that's where the Bucks are. That whole FCM Punk chant that happened in Chicago, they planted it with a couple of fans. They're going to keep manipulating like they do. Like people talk about Hogan. What's the time right there, Will? 10 minutes. I already mentioned him.
4 minutes, 30 seconds into the episode, Bobby brought up Hogan already.
People talk about Hogan manipulating the backstage. These 3 are the biggest manipulators. That's why you have a guy like Adam Page that can say that he was a world champion.
Yeah. We just saw FTR team with Ricky the Dragon. Which was really cool.
Yeah, that was a fantastic show. Ted, you got one for me?
I guess the thing that right now that I am not happy with is I hate to say this, and I'm not trying to be mean, but what direction is going on with some of this stuff in the WWE with the women's division? We seem like with Bianca, we've got some stuff going on there with Raw. We now got a feud with Bayley and Becky that doesn't involve the title, but what are we going to do with Ronda? Are we just going to do Ronda and Charlotte again when she comes back? Is somebody going to go over to SmackDown? It's like, what's going on? And, there's some great women wrestlers there, but it's like there's that one side, there's no direction. And you saw the stuff trending the other night, fire Ronda Rousey and all the other stuff. And it's like, I just don't know what's going on. And I'm confused and I don't know, because they've got some great women there, some great talent. And like I said, it's like we've got some stuff going on the Raw side, but it's like SmackDown is let's just put it over to the side and not worry about it.
Agreed. I'm going to piggyback off of Ted. I think that what they're doing with Ronda is not great. They could definitely do more and move some of the women from Raw over to SmackDown, because they've got all these unused women on Raw. And I say it a lot, that they don't utilize their roster very well. But, there are tons of women that they could move from Raw to SmackDown to help kind of pad that roster a little bit and give Ronda some better opponents to work with. I'm not saying that, Shotzi and Shayna aren't good, but, we keep doing the same thing with Ronda. We've talked about it before. They could take Sonya and have her be a mouthpiece for Ronda. We all know that Ronda's not great on the mic. She needs to have someone speaking for her, I feel.
Yeah, but I think
the makeup is awful. I can't.
I don't think she's great in the ring.
I know there's been a bunch of heat on Twitter about men going off about her makeup, they don't have the right to an opinion on it. But as a female, her makeup is awful. It just doesn't work. It looks weird. It doesn't go with what she's wearing. It's just weird. I don't like it.
I think a match with Charlotte, I think that was the last time Ronda had a good match, was with Charlotte. So I'd welcome a Charlotte feud. Obviously, when Ronda had the worst match at that last Premium Live event. Hands down, that was a great event in spite of her and her match. I don't think that she's got the dedication that she had originally, and where she's at now, I just don't think she's phoning it in. It's almost like her last UFC run at the end, after she lost that first match and her whole stigma disappeared. That's kind of like the Ronda Rousey I feel right now. She's not the box office draw that she was. She no longer is the most unbeatable person. This is Mike Tyson in 2000.
SmackDown right now just feels like it's in a holding pattern, because it's almost like they're being held hostage by this whole Sasha Naomi thing. Mm-hmm. And it's just everybody's waiting for that to happen. So they're not even paying attention to anything else that's going on. And that's what drives me crazy about this whole Sasha Naomi thing. They're just overshadowing this whole division with and I don't know, they're coming back or whatever, but honestly, it doesn't matter to me. Just let's focus on what we have. There are some good talents there that could do well. I'm not like everybody else. I'm not opposed to Charlotte coming back. I'd like to see her tweak her character a little bit, but she's a Flair. She still has to play that type of character. That's her legacy. But I think there's still some women that they're totally misusing. I look at something like a Lacey Evans, who I think is actually pretty damn good. And if they gave her the right direction with her character, she could be at least serviceable as far as a contender. But Ronda right now, you're right. She just looks like she does not want to be there, or just doesn't care, or isn't worried about improving herself or anything. So it just feels like it's just on hold while we wait for something to happen.
I think the biggest.
And
go ahead, Ted. Sorry.
Well, go ahead.
I was going to say my biggest takeaway from it is Raw having the women's focus in the War Games match. That's 10 very able-bodied women that could be main event quality challengers for Ronda on SmackDown, and all 10 of them are on Raw right now. And I feel like that says a lot about it when you have such a heavy-weighted roster on one side versus the other show. So I think that's my big takeaway from it, is I think the women's roster is not divided as evenly and well as the men's roster is in WWE right now, for sure.
But the biggest thing about the women's division in WWE, especially the heels, is if you really want to get a deep dive into it, go to the Heel Truth, where this week me, Will, and Alison did a whole show on that for an hour and 19 minutes. You can find out everything about that at Hillbilly Heel. Don't forget to give a 5-star review on Apple.
This was all just a clever setup for you to promote your show.
I was like, wait a second. You already say this is the end of the show where I get to sit back and it's like the part where you guys get to promote yourselves.
But
he fast forwarded in his head.
Yeah, I was
Promote at the beginning. Not everybody stays to the end. That's the rule I live by.
I was trying to remember what show I did hear that on, that you said that, Alison, about getting Sonya on there and doing like an MMA stables. Now I realize it was Ted's show. Yeah. So I thought that was a great idea. Like get her as the mouthpiece and get like a stable with them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, speaking of Miss Alison, I'm going to send it up to you now for news and rumors. What you got for us this week?
The first one is going to be the Big Burberry belt.
The Triple B?
The Triple B. What'd you guys think about it?
I think the belt, I think the segment, I think MJF is on fire. Next to Roman Reigns, he's the biggest thing in professional wrestling right now. And if he was in WWE, I'm really curious on what they did with him, with Roman Reigns, with Cody Rhodes. I think it's good where he's at right now. And I think he might be untouchable enough that the Bucks and Omega and Jericho can't mess with him. And they might realize that, this guy is writing some checks that we can't cash. And hopefully they will respect that and they won't do what they did with CM Punk.
Yeah, I was saying before the show that I'm a traditionalist when it comes to belts. I don't like them changing straps and all that stuff, different colors and everything. But I do enjoy it when a heel is obviously trying to get heat by doing something like that. So we mentioned Daniel Bryan's eco-friendly belt. And, I think when Cena originally do the spinner belt for the U.S., was he a heel at that point when he did that? I'm not sure. But
I think he had already made his heel turn, yeah.
So, but him doing that with the Burberry belt, that's of course heel heat 101. So I'll let the expert talk about that. But yeah, great move.
Yeah, same thing. I loved it. Those little minute details, because here we've had for the last couple of months, MJF's the face. Everybody wants to cheer him, so he has to do. Even the promo he did. Did you notice at the beginning, it wasn't as charismatic. It wasn't his normal promo cadence and style. And I think he did that on purpose, because normally the crowd would be up, and he slowed it down to where it was almost boring in a way that you had to pay attention to it. And then it led up to a crescendo, and then boom. And it's getting heat back, change the belt, whatever. Somebody posted a clip on Twitter of his suit. Did you see the words on his suit?
Yeah.
Little tiny words that said, better than you. I mean, all those little minute details. So, yes, change the belt, change it. I love that he went ahead and said, you ain't going to see me wrestle but maybe 5 or 6 times. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to pay for it. Just this whole thing. Love it. Love it.
Yep.
Yeah, I thought the in-ring was very Jake Roberts, like where you had to listen. He was speaking that soft tone, but every word meant something. I think was it one of the presidents that said you had to carry a big stick.
Yeah, talk softly and carry a big stick. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. The Canadian knows the presidents better than the other three of us.
Teddy Roosevelt.
No,
I knew who it was. I was going to let you
he was
fumble
named
the
after
phrase.
me. Yeah, he was named after me.
Nice.
Teddy Roosevelt. He was named after me.
Teddy
But,
the
you know-
Hill Roosevelt.
Yeah, if you talk to some Native Americans,
Yeah.
they might agree with that. He'll comment.
Bobby, that makes sense though, that he would be a lot calmer now that he's actually got the championship. It's like he was so like hyped up and stressed out before he got it, and now he's got it. So now everything's fallen into place nicely for him. And of course, now he's going to show that he's the cold-blooded killer too by taking care of Regal. So yeah, it kind of makes it. If you're watching the character arc with this guy, it's just absolutely amazing. Like he is on another level right now.
Yeah, and just like Roman is now, just like just like Flair, you don't need to wrestle every week to get over. You just come out, you talk them into the seats, like Dusty would say.
And the other thing, even from the beginning, I knew something was up when the last time he had something big, he has him carrying him out on a throne.
Right.
And he just won the world championship, but there's nothing. Just him and Regal and a belt. And that's what I'm saying. It's building back up to get that heel heat, to get all those little minute details of, like I said, that character. Now he's the champ. So, yes, love it, love it, love it.
Yeah, and the belt, like, the Burberry pattern on it is subtle. Like, it doesn't super stand out. Like, you have to, like, look at it. Like, I almost didn't notice it at first.
I like the
It's like one of those from the 90s where the sailboat would come out like 3D at the mall.
I liked the color contrast. I'm not a big custom belt fan, but I liked this one and I'll just echo the points that Ted and BC Hunter had about the hill moves and having those kind of hill tactics with what they do. I feel like just echoing those points home. What's next off your list, Miss Siegel?
Sheamus is being pushed aside for KO's title run.
Or title push?
Or title push.
Thank goodness. I've never been a Sheamus fan. He looks like a main eventer, but to me, he's always been a mid-carder. I'm not excited about him in any matches, whether it's against McIntyre or Reigns. KO, you definitely know that story is going to further the Sami Zayn stuff, so it makes a lot more sense. Is it ABC booking? Maybe, but it's good booking. I think that KO will put on a much better show, and I'd be more excited about seeing KO versus Reigns than Sheamus.
If you listen to our show, we're like huge Sheamus guys. Although I prefer the heel Sheamus, and the reason that we are huge Sheamus guys is because he's that guy that you think, oh, all right, here comes another Sheamus match, and then you watch the match and it's fantastic. Like the story behind it is great. They beat the shit out of each other during the match. It's just by the end of it, you're like, holy crap, that was a good match. And that's what I love. I always call him, in case of emergency, break glass guy. Just toss him in the main event. He'll take care of that for a little while, and then he'll come back out and go mid-card or something like that. But like I've been saying it for a while, I think KO could possibly be the guy that can beat Roman Reigns, or that they should have beat Roman Reigns, because he's the complete opposite of Roman Reigns, and he can be that everyman hero, kind of like what they're trying to do with Eddie Kingston in AEW. And the more you build Reigns up, the closer you get. But I was expecting it to be KO and Sammy would be taking care of the tag scene for a little while, and then it leads to him going up against Roman. So if they're pulling the trigger this early on KO, I think he's just going to be another notch in the belt for Roman.
I think
typically Royal Rumble, if that's where the main event's going to happen, typically that's a blow off like match where there's really not a chance. Like Bob Holly got a world championship match,
right?
Royal Rumble, so it's it's not the believable one, but maybe it's starting to. I've seen the rumors of Elimination Chamber with Sammy getting the match, and I think maybe this could lead to it, and maybe this is like where maybe that does bring to Mania, where you've got that tag team match with Zayn and Owens versus the Usos.
Well,
yeah, I can see like a beatdown at Royal Rumble where Sammy finally has to step in to help his friend, and that's what leads to elimination.
Or Sammy wins the Rumble.
Yeah.
I was gonna say Owens gets, he starts to get that build, and then Sammy has to make that final decision, like you were saying, BC. That's where the turn happens. Owens loses, but that's the out Sammy needs out of the bloodline to make it happen. The build for Sammy versus Roman at Elimination Chamber makes sense because it's in Montreal. It's his hometown. We know that WWE likes to give the L to the hometown boys, but you could still let, Sammy, who's got one of the biggest pops in the business right now, go home, get that hometown shine, build a good story with Roman, even if we know, historically the Elimination Chamber match has been a number one contenders kind of thing for the tag titles, or they've been for the tag titles. We haven't seen a world title Elimination Chamber match in a while, so I don't think this will be the one they throw it in on. So it's the perfect opportunity for that. And yes, they will be just one notch and another notch on Roman's belts, but that does build to the Owens, Sami Zayn taking the belts off the Usos at Mania when you combine them two after Elimination Chamber. So I think all the puzzle pieces are there. It's just a matter of Trips and those guys book it right.
Now that you mentioned Montreal, Will, actually that makes a whole lot of sense that is where KO and Sammy reunite, because the pop would be massive for that. So maybe it's Elimination Chamber. That's where Sammy just gets beaten down by Reigns and it's KO coming out. And then that leads to the whole Uso feud with those two guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing with Sheamus, if it would have been a couple years ago where they still had a pay-per-view in, December or whatever, I could see them going ahead and doing that. But now with a change of schedule, and even like Bobby was saying, even though we know that Roman is not going to lose at the Rumble, still with Kevin Owens, there'll be that one or two near falls where you'll have that 1% doubt. Whereas if it was Sheamus, you're not going to have any doubts. Roman's going to keep the title. But with Owens' history with Roman, you might have that little 1% doubt on that one near fall. You're going to be like, oh, God, they're going to change the title. You at least have that with Owens, whereas Sheamus, I don't think you're going to have that at all.
Fair.
Yeah, I agree.
What's next on your list?
My last thing, I wanted to keep the news and rumors short, so that we could talk about Bruiser Brody. My last thing is we finally get Seth the title belt, and then freaking Austin Theory takes it away.
I think Theory needed it. It's a rebuild of Theory. They had the McMahon Theory that was up here. Trips dropped him to down here, and then now Trips is rebuilding him because he is an NXT guy. He is a guy that Trips likes and brought up. I think he was trying to get the McMahon stink off of him. Mm-hmm. And it's crazy to say that about a guy that basically created pro wrestling and made it with the sport and the fun that we love today. But the stink needed to be off of him, and I think that this was the right move.
Yeah, I said the exact same thing, Bobby. The McMahon stink needs to come off of him.
That's why I always listen to your podcast.
Which is sad to say, though. But I love Theory taking the title. This is great. It's the rebuilding. And I just love that it proves that nobody's dead. Nobody's buried or anything like that. All you need is one great promo, one great beatdown, and then maybe a title switch. And away you go. You're back in the picture. I love Triple H's comments at the press conference afterwards where he's talking about basically the rumors of Austin Theory's death were, grossly exaggerated. Mentioned that his next feat is going to be to walk on water, which was great. Triple H is playing into the IWC there. And I think it also frees Seth up because I think you never know. He might be the guy that takes the title off of Roman, setting up the whole Cody taking the title off of Seth because he has his numbers. So yeah, it still keeps lots of intrigue going. But Austin Theory, he's going to be fine. He's going to be a massive superstar for them.
Yeah, and I think Seth also, he's got a natural rematch with Cody when Cody comes back. Like there's gotta be a fourth match, which it's crazy to think that Seth is gonna lose 4 times, right? I think that's the count. Yeah. 4 times to Cody.
Yeah.
Seth is the most losing wrestler on the roster.
He's bulletproof.
But Seth is also bigger than the title, and I've said this
Yes.
and I wrote about it. Seth's the Babe Ruth of professional wrestling. He's a 500 hitter for his entire career. He's, won as many matches as he's lost. He's held, but the interesting fact about Seth Rollins is, in his career, he's held a title more than 50% of the time. And if you think about the fact he went like 4 years in WWE without holding gold at all, and he still kept that statistic up, says everything it is. But Seth is much bigger than the title at this point. He doesn't need a belt to be over. He doesn't need a world title, a U.S. title. He could just be Seth Rollins and still be the biggest superstar on the screen. Not name Roman Reigns, if not equal to Roman Reigns in a lot of ways.
That's Seth friggin' Rollins, sir.
Seth freaking Rollins, sir.
I am super.
And it goes back to just like HBK. He was called Mr. WrestleMania, but look at how many WrestleMania matches he lost.
Yeah.
I mean, Seth, to that point, he can take an L when he needs to, and it's not going to hurt him.
Yeah.
Seth is HBK right now.
Agreed. That's absolutely a great hot take, BC Hunter. He is 100% playing that character in 2022.
Yeah. I'm glad they took Theory's phone away. I hated that.
Yeah.
I like this version of Theory. I think he needed the turn. He needed the whole "I'm not a kid anymore" thing. I love all of that because one of my biggest things was he wasn't, when he first won Money in the Bank, I said he wasn't experienced enough to have it. He needed to hold it as long as he could and feel what it's like to be in the limelight, on the main roster, on the biggest stage. And like you guys said, just echoing at home, I think this was exactly what he needed to do to still be able to be taken seriously.
Yeah, he's no longer Tyler Breeze 2.0.
Yeah. Not to prolong this, but like most great baby faces or heels, he needs to be grizzled a bit. Like, nice that he's growing the beard out to grizzle him up. But it's kind of like when Randy Orton fought Mick Foley. He just needed that match to get bloody, to get scarred up and all that, and then people will take him seriously. That's what Theory needs right now. But he'll get that. He'll be fine.
Yeah, Edge did the same thing with Foley.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Taken serious. And Triple H to a point.
Well, this right here, gentlemen, this is the ultimate playback edition. Way back in the machine in April, Botched and Chair Shots attempted to go live for the very first time. And that episode was Bruiser Brody, the WWC, and the Violent Puerto Rico Territory. Because of some faulty production work by yours truly, that episode never got off the cutting room floor. So I get to have this conversation with you guys again in full audio and HD. I'm going to ask you your initial thoughts to start the conversation on these three things. Bruiser Brody the person, the World Wrestling Council, and the Puerto Rico Territory that was the 1980s. And you guys can just tee off whichever one of you want to go first.
First off, Will, are you sure we are recording?
We are recording. We have audio. We are live on Twitch. We are good to go, guys.
I just want to make sure the red light is on.
The red light is working.
My first thought, if I can go first, Brody as a person was a huge family man. You didn't see that. I remember as a kid seeing the magazine cover where he died. And that was like my first, I guess, like realization that these guys just aren't cartoon characters, that they're real people. And, even in the days of Pro Wrestling Illustrated and the magazine that was totally kayfabed, you knew this was real. Like, they talked about his son, they talked about his wife. Like, I was like, Bruiser Brody has a son? Bruiser Brody has a wife of this wild man? Like, has all this? And it was real. Like, that's when wrestling became real. Like, that's when I think I got even more invested in pro wrestling because, wow, this guy that I've watched on TV periodically, he's dead now. Like, this is, this is like a year and a half after my great grandmother died. And I was like, now, like, I felt a sadness. Like, it was genuine. Bruiser Brody, his career was cut way, way too short. I know he died in his 40s, but this guy had a great mind for the business. And that's maybe something that stopped him from getting as big as what he could have been at that point in time. World Wrestling Council, I'm not a big fan of Puerto Rican wrestling. They're violent. They're batteries and socks. They don't put them in a sock. They just throw them anyway at the wrestlers. They took wrestling more serious than what it should have been, even in the days of kayfabe. Like, it was dangerous. It was dangerous to perform down there. And the fact that so many wrestlers stopped going down there, including like Dutch Mantel, Tony Atlas, Iron Sheik, who are all huge stars down there, stopped going in protest of Brody's death. Said something about Brody the man and the Federation or Council. And I don't remember your third point.
You pretty much touched on them.
Cool.
Ted, BC Hunter?
Or Alison.
Or Alison?
Let Ted go first. I've been taking first all the time. You go for Ted.
Bruiser Brody, didn't get to see much, but what little I did get to actually see, and then the magazines, just, really enjoyed everything about him. Just, the feuds he would have, him and Abdullah, all the different things. And then, like Bobby said, when you found out that he passed away, it was like, oh my gosh, because, at that time, before the 90s hit and all these wrestlers started really dying at young ages, back in those days, if you saw a magazine about something, it was somebody that was like in their 70s or just old age. But for someone to be that young, but just the stuff he did, I still remember the times he would come around and you would see him. And what people don't realize, and I guess one thing that always stood out to me that I remember reading about in the magazine and not really getting to see it until later on, but was, he would wrestle Flair in these different territories when Flair would travel around. And for a big guy, he was going 60 minutes with Flair, and that shows the athleticism, plus with the wild antics and the blood and stuff like that. But, a big guy like that was able to go 60 minutes with Flair told you what kind of wrestler he really was. So I really respected that. And then as far as the Puerto Rican and the World Council down there, everything I read about it and stuff back, it was just like the wild, wild west. Guys would go down to get a good paycheck, but it was just so crazy that, there was only a few select of them, like I said, Dutch and some of those others that would go down there and stay for long periods of time. But it was just crazy because when you really go back to some of that death match wrestling that we see today, there was stuff going on back there like that back then. So it was just a different breed.
Yeah, for me, I mean, Bruiser Brody was kind of this anomaly because we weren't seeing much of him where I was, but I knew of him because I was a big magazine collector, and the magazines loved talking about Bruiser Brody. It was that time, like when this death happened, it really kind of made you realize the fantasy of this whole wrestling thing was kind of taken off. It originally had started with the whole Magnum TA situation where he had his career ended. He had the Von Erich situation as well. And then this Bruiser Brody thing that really hit it home. You're like, okay, this is kind of, I'm starting to realize this is a bit of a seedy business as well as this fun business. But, for me, just going down the rabbit hole, watching Bruiser Brody, like one thing I'll say about him, he knew his worth. So he wasn't laying down just for anybody, but if he liked you, he was going to put one hell of a match on, like you said, Ted. Like he's doing 60 minutes with Flair and stuff like that. Selling for, like, he was a fantastic seller. The fact that he was so athletic too. I mean, when I did the research, he's another one of those people that came from West Texas State, which was like a factory for wrestling athletes. It's amazing the roll call of people that came from there. But he played high school basketball at a high level. He played, football for them and could have almost went to the NFL. He's roommates with Stan Hansen or whatever there, and then they form this bond, and they're just ass kicking machines over in Japan and stuff like that. So it's fun to watch him, especially like I've even watched stuff where he's in the WWF And the guy's like over 300 pounds at a time, blown up, and like he doesn't even look like what you see him in the mid 80s when he's trimmed down. He looks pretty good. I mean, he influenced so many guys like John Nord. I didn't even realize it, but he influenced Hacksaw Duggan. But as I go back and watch Mid-South now, and I see when Hacksaw first came in, he did have one of those sheepskin jackets, kind of like Bruiser Brody. So he just had an influence on those people. And yeah, I mean, he was just fun to watch for sure. But of course, if he didn't like you, ask Lex Luger, or it might not go so well. But I think that was more the promoters and stuff like that than actually Lex. As far as WWC and Puerto Rico and all that, we actually, ironically enough, here in Atlantic, Canada, got to see a lot of wrestlers from WWC because they come up to Nova Scotia to wrestle here. So guys like Hercules Ayala and Chicky Star and guys like that would actually come to our region and wrestle. So we were familiar with these guys, although they weren't the same level maybe they were down there, and we didn't know about the insane violence that was going on down there with these guys. But now looking back on the Puerto Rico scene, it was such a hotbed, and they were basically printing money, but they're almost screwing themselves over because of the way that they treated the wrestlers, the fans, and just the riots that were starting. And they had a couple of title switches there for the NWA title that they couldn't even recognize because it was just so that Flair could get out of the country and stuff like that. Yeah. It's just so it's a shame that it got to that level. You love the heat of it, but it's maybe got to be a little bit too much, and then in the end it cost the man his life because of it.
Alison, I'm going to start with you on this next question, and then I'm going to let the gentleman fall behind. Kayfabe and keeping it with his family. Bruiser was notorious for being Frank the husband and father, and Frank the NFL player. And then, his widow has historically said things like when he would get out of the taxi and walk through the doors, he became Bruiser Brody. And you could see the very drastic difference from one place to the other. And people were smartening up into the business by the late 80s. People were starting to understand that it was a work. What do you think about his role in keeping kayfabe alive so late, even into the late 80s? Being able to separate it from his life between his being a husband, being a father, being Frank the person versus being Bruiser Brody the wrestler, like still keeping it split.
I mean, honestly, like I wish that some of the current wrestlers would kind of get a little bit more of that kayfabe, because it at the time it allowed him to still live his life and not be bothered with having to be that person, without social media and things like that. You don't have some sort of image you have to uphold. So like the juxtaposition of him like being this kind soul on one hand and then being Bruiser Brody on the other, like to me it's really interesting. And like the guys that a lot of them try to keep it up today, like I think it's cool, like in the Dark Side of the Ring episode, there's that moment where he was talking about being in the NFL before he realized that the cameras were rolling, and he like freaked out a little bit thinking that like him being his normal self like got recorded. Like it's just interesting.
It was, I think, an interesting time. Like on my the heel like this on my TikTok at Yellow Shoe Guy. One of my things was King Kong Bundy this past week, and people were commenting that they'd met Bundy as a young child, and Bundy refused to sign an autograph, and he basically pushed them away. That's what the guys did because their characters were themselves, and I think that's a lot of times, like when guys like Cornette talk or like other heels talk, like Blanchard, Anderson. They were looked down upon in public because there was no difference between like Terry Bollea and Hulk Hogan. They were the same person. And Brody was able to do that as well. Barbara, his widow, talks about this amazing family man. But if you watched World Class Championship Wrestling or you watched WWC, that was not the guy we saw on TV. Like that was a totally different person. He knew the character and he knew the human being, and he knew if he was in public or if he was in public view that he had to be Bruiser Brody. And that's one of the great things about pro wrestling back then, or maybe it's one of the best wrestling back then, is you had to be that character in public. Like if you went to a bar, you were, Abdullah the Butcher couldn't go anywhere, like really, because he had to be this crazy guy that couldn't speak and want to stab people with a fork. Like you don't want to be next to Abdullah while he's eating a steak because he might stab you. Brody is this exact same way. And those guys back then took it so serious because that's how they made their money. It wasn't guaranteed money. It's somebody like Roddy Piper, who famously refused to lose on TV because he would lose money in other territories. So, great for Brody, and great for the love of the business. And I'm not even sure if it's a love of the business or you have to be that way to make money in this business, because that's what it is at the end of the day, is a business.
Ted,
BC? Go ahead, BC.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, I'm with you, Alison. Like, I have this argument all the time with Jay, my co-host. Like, I wish there was more kayfabe attempted by today's wrestlers. And he always argues, well, in the age of social media, you can't. But you made a good point there. There's an image to uphold. Unfortunately, the image that people are trying to uphold today is their non-wrestling image, because they're just trying to promote that instead of keeping that. Whereas a guy like Brody was trying to uphold his wrestling image for the fans. And it's, you mentioned Piper as well, Bobby, and that's another famous guy who was a fantastic guy out of the ring, family man, massive family man, good, kind-hearted guy, but one of the greatest heels that ever lived. And you wouldn't have had a clue about that the whole time that you were following him as a wrestler. It's not as hard as people make it out to be. Just take a little bit more pride in keeping that character developed. But as far as Brody being this amazing family man, that's not surprising. When when I was doing research on him, I found out that he was a sports writer. The guy was like an intelligent guy, so he knew, like I say, he knew his worth. He knew what it meant for him to look bad in the business, so he was going to make sure that was upheld. And, but he also knew that's cameras off, and when that's done, I'm just going to recluse to my family, and that's not a surprise that he became that type of person.
Yeah, and just like y'all were saying there, Arn Anderson has said it many times on his podcast, talking about in the old days, heels would usually get paid a little more of the house money because they couldn't make picture money, as they called it. They didn't have the merch tables. They didn't have that because they didn't sign autographs. They didn't do all that to make extra income. And, now, like, me and BC's had this discussion and I've said on mine about, just keeping that little element of your character, off of social media. Like one example, and whether you like him or not, whether you think anything about him, one thing that I respect is, have y'all ever seen Hook's Twitter?
No.
Mm-mm.
He don't post nothing. There's nothing there. You don't follow nobody. You don't do nothing. Now, whether you like him or not, whatever kind of image he's trying to put on, he just don't do social media, And some of these wrestlers, they can use. We've talked about social media being the new kayfabe. Like I said, with all week leading up to Dynamite, MJF was all over Twitter putting down Indianapolis and Indiana, staying in character. And so many of these people are so scared of being disliked or being hated, and it goes through all athletics. Nobody wants to embrace the bad guy. And, I even think about NBA back in the 80s, the Detroit Pistons, they were the bad boys. They embraced it. They didn't care if you booed them. They didn't care. And we switched to fast forward today to these NBA players that have burner accounts because they don't want anybody to say anything negative about them. It's all about, like I said, that image. And, I appreciate Brody for doing that because we've heard that time and time again. And the other thing we've heard time and time again is how many of the heels were actually really good guys in real life and the baby faces were the buttholes in real life.
Yeah, and the Twitter thing, Dean Ambrose, John Moxley, and MJF, they both play Twitter to the T. Moxley very rarely posts anything. And I think he was forced to get the Twitter from WWE. I think he's done one post or two posts, if I'm not mistaken. But MJF, he plays the heel. So many guys are so scared of being heels now and being hated. It's crazy. They've got the insurance for their cars. They've got the insurance in the backup if they go anywhere in public. If you're a heel, be a heel. And what better thing than you can just tell people, and this is why I probably got my rated Y rating, and I can say things, and Botched Chair Shots and SmackDown Network don't support me on stuff, is say whatever the F you want, and whoever comes back at you, F them, because it's my opinion, and I'm allowed to have it.
Or you're playing a character. You can claim that you're playing a character on Twitter and just get away with it, right? I mean, I think people are so scared to death because they're worried about, I want to be able to get the next job in case I get let go from this place. But why are you worried about that? You should be worrying about getting yourself so over in the place you're at that you're bulletproof. And to both your guys' points about, a guy like Bundy, say, where he didn't sign an autograph, or Arn Anderson, getting a little extra money for being a heel because you can't get that stuff. Yeah, they might have not signed an autograph or they missed out on that merch sale, but they got way more people coming to the arena because they want to see them get beat up by that good guy, which is the whole point of what you're doing as a heel. Now, today, that's why you have all this 50-50 stuff, because nobody's a heel. They don't want to, but and now fans they're not salivating to come to the arena to see whoever get their ass kicked by the top babyface. So it's just blah right now. We need those heels. That's why MGF is such a breath of fresh air. And even though Roman's doing it in a different way, he is the cool heel. He's still a heel. He's still, when you're watching him with those facials that he does, you're still like, God, this guy's going to snap on somebody pretty quick. And I still want to see him get beat. So it's frustrating, but I don't know how we got in this direction.
It's exactly we no longer have the Midnight Express and Jim Cornette versus Rock Express. We no longer have Dusty versus the Horseman. We no longer have that heat. What WWE, I think, really depends on is, hey, Monday Night Raw is coming, and you're just going to see blah, blah, blah superstars not even announcing matches. They're expecting WWE or Raw to sell the tickets. WrestleMania sells the tickets. The event sells the tickets. Where in the past, it was the wrestlers that sold the tickets, and that was part of the contract, was you draw more, you're on top of the card, you make more money. So it was true back in the day that winner's purse, quote unquote, meant something. And now it's, hey, I'm here. I get paid no matter if they like me or don't like me or want to see me. Hey, I'm here. Pay me.
Even Miz taking the $100 bill from that kid, that was a nice heel move. I love that. It didn't work out, but it was still a heel move that he did. Instead, you have a serial killer that's handing out money to fans and being a good guy. So.
Yep.
True.
Yep. Look at Ted DiBiase and his vignettes, and all his $100, things, and kicking the basketball from that kid. Dude, DiBiase, and he was an upper mid carder in the UWF when he went to WWF. He friggin' that character drew.
Lived the gimmick. He lived the gimmick.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
And McMahon,
and
it's designed after him.
And see, that's the whole thing about, you've got those different types, like Brody, talking about him going to these different territories. He was an attraction, just like Andre was.
Yep.
Right.
They would book him in. He's the wild man. You're going to get bloods. You're going to get chaos. He's going to go out in the stands and scare kids and all that. So that was that perfect fit for those that they bring him in and do that. And then, just like $1 Million Man, you've got the rich heel trope, which also a couple episodes ago that you can find on the Heel Truth, wherever you get your Spotify, Google, Apple. I did a whole episode on that. Leave 5-star review.
Would you argue that's a good point too, Ted? Like, would you argue besides, obviously a Flair who's the traveling champion has to go to territory, would Brody be maybe the next biggest attraction aside from Andre in that whole territory day when you had people moving from territory to territory?
To me, him and Abdullah, and they were
and I put
connected.
Brody over, but
yeah, and that's it. I think Brody was over, but to me, if you look at the work he did, and he would go in, and we've talked about a little bit there. He could sell, and if he respected you, he would do the job, because a lot of times that's, again, he was the big bad heel that would come in, and then some places he might be a face and might get cheered. But yeah, I think he was one of those that probably right up there, because, like I said, Vince, pimped out Andre and let him go around all the territories for the attraction. And then you had Brody going, Japan, world class, St. Louis and Kansas, all those places, and that probably was at that time because, again, that was the thing. Like I said, I saw him in the magazines, and you would see one month he would be in this place, and then a couple magazines later, he'd be over here. And besides Flair, he was one of those that same time period that was just seemed to be traveling everywhere. So I think he was one of those big attractions that people could bring in and knew that they could draw money from.
And I think their attraction too was, I think Abdullah and Brody was almost a tag team attraction. They brought them both into the territory.
Well, let me hop in here real quick, because this is the perfect segue for my next question. Ted, I'm actually going to let you tee off with this one first. There is a method to my madness tonight in my notes. You guys are making it easy for me. While we're here, Abdullah the Butcher and brawling. A lot of these things that these guys were known for then predate the death matches of 2022 with your CZWs and your GCWs and stuff. But in a lot of ways, when you go back into the 80s and even the late 70s with things like the Tupelo concession stand brawl and Jerry Lawler, when you get to your Abdullah the Butchers and your Bruiser Brodies, do you think they used it in WWC, in WCCW, in AWA? Do you think they used these brawling, hardcore death matches as the ultimate blow-off for these guys and their feuds? Was this the proper way to use this kind of a gimmick match for it to be so hardcore? Ted, do you think, letting you tee off here, do you think this was the right way to do a death match if they were going to do it, versus GCW just letting everybody do whatever the fuck they want whenever the fuck they want to do it?
And again, wrestling is like pizza. Everyone loves their thing. And
I'm not yucking anybody's yum. Not yucking anybody's yum. I'm just using it as a reference point.
What I'm saying is, me personally, that's what you build. You first have a singles match. The heel cheats to win. Then the babyface gets a rematch, but the heel cheats again. He's got extra people. So finally it has to go to a steel cage. For 2 years, Buzz Sawyer and Tommy Rich feuded, and they finally had to have the last Battle of Atlanta in a cage, which was basically chain link fence with a top on it, which was the inspiration for Hell in the Cell, which you can find on the SmackDown Patreon, where I do a review of that. But it continues that.
You're giving me so many good clips. I'm just going to clip everything you say off of this episode, Ted.
When you run out of your episode, start promoting my show.
I will.
Don't forget my TikTok.
But seriously, that was the thing. It's just like now Triple H has said, I don't want Hell in a Cell to be a set pay-per-view. It's like, okay, we've got this big feud going, but it's got to peak in March or June or February or whenever Hell in a Cell was, because that's when the Hell in a Cell pay-per-view is. So that's when it has to peak. No, you let it build to those blow-off matches, because that's where the blood, that's where you had Flair and, in the cage with Nikita, Dusty comes to try to save him. It's a blow-off match between the Russian and Flair. Dusty tries to come and save him. Flair turns on Dusty. Arn and Ole come in, break Dusty's leg. The place about riots, and you get the beginning of the Four Horsemen. All that, it all led to something, whether it be a tape fist match or a scaffold match or whatever. It was a blow-off match, and it meant something. It wasn't just okay, here it is.
Yeah, if you had a scaffold pay-per-view, it'd be ridiculous. Like, it makes no sense. Like, Triple H really did do a good job, like talking about that at the last press conference, which WWE now doing press conferences. Where'd they get that idea from? But Triple H talking about that and actually saying, hey, you know what, that's stupid that we've got these blow-off matches as pay-per-view titles. Like, Royal Rumble, yes. Elimination Chamber, yes. But, Hell in a Cell and stuff like that, no. So kudos to Triple H for actually recognizing it and changing it.
Yeah, I mean, like you're saying, they were used. Now, we look at the 80s and stuff like that through rose-colored glasses, obviously. Everything wasn't perfect, the way they blew off these feuds and stuff like that. But for the most part, yes, they were used the right way as far as these matches, these, if you want to call them death matches or whatever, but they used these different types of matches the right way. And I even look at, lately I've been rewatching the whole Tully and Magnum steel cage match, right? And I just grow more of an appreciation for that match the more times I watch it. And it's still to my favorite moment from that match is at the very end where Magnum's got the piece of wood and he looks like he's going to stab him again, just tosses it away. He's like, "You're not worth me selling out my soul for this." It's just, that is art. That is magic right there. But everybody thinks that was it. That was the blow off of the feud, which it was from a match perspective. But the next week, Tully's out on World Championship Wrestling at the interview podium with Shivani, and he's talking about how he's getting revenge on Magnum. He never lost that match. He's getting his title back. He's talking about that week over week. But meanwhile, they're setting up, the TV title tournament, that he's going to win. So now that's going to pull him away from Magnum, and away we go into another angle, right? And so people think that, you just have this blow-off match and that's it, guys, out of the territory and away you go. But sometimes there is still that fine connection. It's just, having a Hell in a Cell pay-per-view, I mean, that's Lethal Lockdown's what it is. You're just having these matches for the hell of having the matches. I would much rather go the whole year without seeing one type of specialty match and then actually have that Hell in a Cell meaning something. And it's going to be where you're anticipating, man, this is going to be gore for some reason because these guys hate each other this much. You mentioned GCW. We're not going to, as you say, yuck somebody's yum, but I'm not a big GCW fan. I don't think the opening match should have just as much violence in it as the closing match or every match in between. Like, you think back to the older days, if you did somebody's moves or if you did somebody's finish in the opening match, you were going to hear from the main event guys, and that's why, I always say, when I'm commenting on some of these pay-per-views, what else is there left to do for the main event? And everybody says, well, these guys have got to steal a show sometime. Well, no, they don't. You're not the main event. Occasionally you steal a show during a big thing like a Savage Steamboat. Yes, that sold the show at Mania, but you still had a strong enough main event that Hogan Andre is still going to be the closer for that. But if I'm watching an episode of Dynamite and you got this trio stuff going on where they're doing 100 moves and they always have the second match of the night, it's never the pre-main event. It's always like, let's get it out of the way and then everybody else can follow that and good luck with it. And it's like you're trying to work together as a team and build something to get to that whole crescendo of it. But yeah, again, I'm veering away from Bruiser Brody on that stuff.
But no, you talk about Tully and Magnum. Even after Magnum's accident, Tully Blanchard attacks Magnum.
Yes.
If you watch it in slow motion, you can see JJ kind of ease him to the ground, but he attacks him even then. I was going to say the whole thing about the Bucks too, just like you brought up, was the Bucks like to be on early in the show because they can do every single move that
crowd is hot
else is going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's their whole thing is they have no originality. They have no storytelling ability other than we're going to put on a Bucks match. We're going to make it more exciting than everybody else. And that's what we do. As it comes to Abdullah and Brody, I don't consider the matches death matches. I consider the matches that were deserved because the guys hated each other that much. Those two characters hate each other that much. You knew a fork was going to come out. You knew blood was going to be there because these guys fought all over the world, territory to territory. You always knew Bruiser Brody versus Abdullah the Butcher. They both hated each other. And it didn't matter if you were in North Carolina, South Dakota, New York, Puerto Rico, Canada. When you knew these two guys were going to be on a card against each other, that there was going to be blood because this was a blood feud. And I don't consider them death matches because their matches told stories, not like GCW or any of that other death match crap going through light tubes and everything else. These guys told a story and it was safe for them in the ring because they knew the next night they had to tell another story in another state, another country, another town that just as violent and just as good.
All right, BC Hunter. Go ahead, Ted.
Real quick. Tully and Magnum, for our younger fans, watch that match and you will see how you try to put somebody's eye out, unlike Seth and Ray.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say.
And on Ted's Patreon. Watch it on Ted's Patreon.
Yeah. Yes, it is on Patreon. I did do an episode of that on the SmackDown Patreon too. We plugged two. Well, actually, the scaffold match, I just put that one up. So that's 3 exclusive audios on the SmackDown Patreon.
And Tully be good enough friends that when Tully gets divorced from his wife, Magnum marries his wife, and they have more children together, and now they're a bonded family.
Yeah.
Blended.
Blended.
Brady Bunch.
Thesaurus.
Okay, so BC Hunter, I'm going to start with you for this one. I've got 3 people that held very key components of what happened with Bruiser Brody in Puerto Rico. I'm going to tee you off. I'm going to say somebody's name. He was one of the owners of WWC. He was very involved with the promotion itself, but he was also historically known elsewhere. It's Gorilla Monsoon. What are your initial thoughts on Gorilla?
Legend. I mean, that talk about kayfabe. That was kind of kayfabe that Gorilla was part owner of this whole venture down in Puerto Rico. I mean, we didn't know this when we're watching this, and everybody talks about the whole the McMahon stranglehold and not willing to work with other territories. But that just goes to show the amount of respect that he had for Gorilla, that he allowed him to do this project. It was quite obvious that he was a major benefactor to that territory, because when he left, that's when things really went downhill for him. He left in '88. I don't know if it was before or after the Brody murder. I'm not sure, but they ended up, they were in the NWA because of Gorilla Monsoon's influence on that. And then as soon as he leaves, they're out of the NWA. They're just kind of floating around, and then all these competitors start coming in. I mean, you could go on about Gorilla's accolades as far as announcing and stuff like that, and his tandem with Heenan and everything. I mean, it's still, that's comedy gold. I love just watching that stuff. Every once in a while, I'll just flip on some primetime wrestling just to laugh when I need a good chuckle with that stuff. But yeah, he was such a key factor in that whole Puerto Rico territory that really, up until a little while ago, most people didn't know unless they really did a deep dive on that territory.
Ted, Bobby, you guys got anything on Gorilla before we move on?
I think
shout out to Gorilla Brain podcast. My buddies Kevin.
Would you stop?
Oh my God. No, Gorilla was amazing. I don't know what I haven't really watched a lot of Gorilla matches, but he's one of those guys that was against Muhammad Ali in Muhammad Ali's prime. He was there for that story. In the 80s, obviously, we mostly know him as an announcer. Gorilla, though, if you look back in that old 1960s/70s NWA photo that that Graham showed at his Hall of Fame. You know, Gorilla was an integral part of pro wrestling, behind the scenes and on the screen. You know, he was that big man that could work. So I think that, you know, Gorilla might not get as much credit as a wrestler and behind the scenes talent as what he really was, and behind the scenes influence as what he really was. But, you know, Gorilla Monsoon is one of those guys that, again, he did so much for pro wrestling, and not just for the WWE and the Northern Territories, but for the Southern Territories, for the NWA, and for WWC.
Okay, next person on the list, Ted's coming your way. Carlos Colon. He was the owner and booker of WWC. He's a WWE Hall of Famer. He was directly involved with helping get Invader #1, Jose Huertas Gonzalez's push to Connecticut. They were getting him ready to go. I'm going to ask you a question with Carlos Colon, then I'm going to immediately ask Alison a question for Carlos Colon. Ted, what are your impressions on what do you think it means to be the booker of such a large promotion and territory? Like, what would you give me the meaning of what that position means and kind of the power Carlos Colon had in Puerto Rico?
From what I've read and seen, I mean, he was like a big deal because the wrestling down there was very big, and he seemed like because, I mean, I don't know exactly all the politics and everything, but, you know, Puerto Rico is not that big. And from everything I can see, that he was a very powerful man down there, and he had a lot of sway, and he, you know, made a lot of money, and he wanted to keep his image up, keep his thing up. You know, there, like I said, the whole thing, even not with Brody, but the different times, you know, the whole thing he pulled with Flair in '83. He went down there, you know, Flair went down there, and Colon billed it as a unification match between his title and the NWA title. And Flair, you know, basically had to let him win, not to get hurt. And then, you know, the NWA didn't sanction it and give the thing, and stripped him of the title. And another one of those title reigns that after he gave it back to Flair that they don't count because it's technically 20 or 22, but we won't go there. But yeah, I mean, just very powerful. And the thing about a promoter is, you know, you got to promote, and he did it. He was good at it, you know, like I said, you know, and that's the one thing you can say whatever you want to say about Tony Khan and his booking and all that. But every time he tweets, every time he talks about this week on Dynamite on TBS, it'd be great. You know, it's just like me. This week on The Hill Truth, it'd be great, you know. So plug my stuff, you know. So Colon did the same thing.
Now, Ms. Siegel, it's your turn. Carlos Colon being in the WWE Hall of Fame, although he was known to be in the room the night Brody got stabbed, do you think this is along the same lines as a Superfly Jimmy Snuka kind of situation where he's directly involved with a murder but still ended up with a Hall of Fame spot? Bobby, I know you've got 2 cents to follow in on this as well. I can see it on your face. How do you think about the involvement is for a Hall of Famer to be directly linked to a murder like this? I guess is what I'm asking you.
Well, before Bobby chimes in, even though I think that we should separate the wrestlers from their personal lives, the wrestler and the, you know, just like with Brody, like the wrestler and the real person are different. However, in this situation, I don't think that Carlos Colon should be in the Hall of Fame because, I mean, he literally witnessed this murder happen and did nothing about it. You know, whether you believe all the things that are said, not said, you know, nobody testified, nobody did anything. They lied to the police about who stabbed Brody. I mean, it's a shitty situation. And I don't think that he should have been rewarded, I guess, in the industry for ignoring what happened. Granted, you know, late 80s, early 90s, you know, things like this were looked differently upon, and I'm sure there were powerful men that, you know, made some of these things happen. But there are certain situations that should keep you out of the Hall of Fame that happen in your personal life. And this is one of them. Like, murder is murder.
Bobby, what do you think about Carlos Colon?
I would say go ahead and put the Y up right now. One, Fabulous Moolah did more for pro wrestling than what Carlos Colon did. She's in the Hall of Fame. She shouldn't be kicked out.
I didn't say she should.
I know. Jimmy Snuka did more for pro wrestling. Was the did he really murder the girl? Was it really determined? Nobody knows. Carlos Colon going into the WWE Hall of Fame is like putting Chris Benoit in the WWE Hall of Fame because he's got blood on his hands. There's no way that Jose Gonzalez did what he did without Colon telling him to do it. There's no way. So just like Charles Manson, Colon pulled the strings. Manson has no blood on his hands. He didn't go to the murders. He didn't commit any of the murders, but he ordered them. Carlos Colon is like a mob boss. Jose Gonzalez was just the weapon that he used. So no different than pulling a gun out and shooting somebody, or like Benoit strangling somebody with his own physical hands. Gonzalez was the weapon. Colon was the murderer. So Carlos Colon, to me, does not belong in the Hall of Fame. And I spit on that, and it ain't cool. That's a reference.
Bobby, I'm very proud of you.
That was a very PC way to put that, Bobby Mack. I'm proud of you for getting through it without completely embarrassing me too much.
Thanks.
This is one of those really tough questions to have to ask because the night of the Bruiser Brody's death, the show went on. We saw it in 99 with Owen Hart, where the tragic death of a wrestler, and then the show went on. This is an open-ended question for any of the four of you. Is there a point when the show must stop and can't go on anymore? When you have something like a Bruiser Brody or an Owen Hart situation, should there be a point where these promoters pull the plug and just stop this show from happening?
Yeah, I think death is one of those.
I think the difference between Brody and Owen, though, is Brody was behind the scenes. Owen was in front of the crowd. So I do believe that they should have stopped the Owen show. Brody, I think the guys in the back, I think other than the big payday, because again, this is not guaranteed contracts. If those guys from America didn't go out to the ring and perform, they were not going to get paid. So I understand there's a flip there. Would I have gone out? I don't know. Depends on how much money I was going to be paid, I guess, if I'm going to go out and perform after I see one of my best friends, get killed, like, Tony Atlas, Iron Sheik, Dutch Mantel. And from the stories I've heard too, is the heel locker room didn't even know Brody was killed until Sheik and Atlas wrestled, and Atlas told Sheik about it and in the ring. And then that's when some of those troubles started to happen.
Well, he wasn't dead yet.
No.
They just didn't know he had been stabbed.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. Like the night that Owen died, that should have been the end of that show right there. Because I don't even know how you go on after that happened. The Brody thing, again, I think from a wrestler's standpoint, they probably should have all said, no, we're not going on. We just have one of our people stab another one of our wrestling brethren here. Now, again, Brody didn't die at that point. He died on the operating table after a couple of operations due to blood loss because the medical system down there was just horrible. Like some people have said, they think that if he had been in the States or somewheres, he might have lived if they had been able to get to him soon enough. But I think the reason the show went on there is because, again, the whole Puerto Rico thing, they probably worried about the crowd would have rioted if they had called the show off, and it could have led to more death in that situation. But I think from the wrestler standpoint, they should have all took a stand and said, what the hell? We're not going out there until this guy's arrested. This invader is arrested, But yeah, I agree. Death, yeah, that's a pretty good reason to stop a show. You can always reimburse the people or have them keep their tickets for another time.
Well, guys, we did it. We trucked through. We filled some time. We talked about some territory wrestling. I'm going to throw a curveball in here because I do it at the end of all my interviews, but I'm going to start doing it at the end of my episodes with my guest here for you guys as well. I ask 5 rapid fire questions. I'm going to give each one of you one question, some having to do with wrestling, some not. I want your first initial answer when I ask you. BC Hunter, I'm going to start with you first. Who was your favorite superstar growing up?
Growing up, Hulk Hogan.
Nice.
As a teenager, it turned into Bret Hart.
Bobby,
Nuts.
What's your favorite food?
Chicken. Because you cook it anyway.
That's a very Bobby Mack answer. Ted, what's your favorite venue you've ever watched a wrestling show in?
Show in would probably have been this past last year when I got to go to and see AEW in Charlotte, because that had been the first time I've been to the Charlotte Coliseum for the Fight for the Fallen, when speaking of death matches, Jericho and Nick Gage and Cash ripped his arm, and the match had to stop suddenly. Love the Charlotte Coliseum. So much history there.
Allison, yours? What is your favorite wrestling show you've attended live?
Oh. That's hard. I'm going to say SummerSlam. No, that's a lie. Ric Flair's last match.
Ric Flair's last match was a solid pick. My favorite superstar growing up was Mick Foley. My favorite food is pepperoni pizza. My favorite wrestling venue that I've had a chance to see people wrestle live in was the Memphis Coliseum. My favorite live show that I've been to, probably Ric Flair's last match because of what it was. It was a fantastic show.
Was that the WrestleMania 24 match, or was that later on?
What? Oh, Flair's last match. This is my favorite part of the episode because I don't have to say anything. You guys get to plug your stuff, and then we get to go home. BC Hunter, I'm going to let you tee off. You go first. Tell everybody where to find you, what you guys got going on at Wrestling with the Truth.
I would like you to go to the Heel Truth and check out every one of their episodes, as well as go to the Smack Draw Patreon and check out the Heel Truth and Ted the Hillbilly Heel doing his bonus episodes on the the last Battle of Atlanta and the scaffold match, and also the what was the other one, Ted? Sorry, I went blank on it.
Tully and Magnum.
Tully and Magnum, that's
Tully
right. So
Magnum.
yes, please go support Ted the Hillbilly Heel on Twitter, on Apple, everywhere. And if you get a chance, go check out Wrestling with the Truth on YouTube and on Apple, and leave us a 5-star review and all that jazz.
Ted, you want to plug your show?
No.
You've heard mine through there. So let's go to Bot Spots and Chair Shots. And you can check them out every Thursday night on the Twitch, and then the replay on the YouTube, part of the Smack Raw. You can find them on all that. You can find Bobby on TikTok. And again, Wrestling with the Truth, you get BC and Jay Myers, the Nightmare. And they've had a great November to Remember with great guests. This past week's episode with Armchair Booking guys, Steve and Dwaylen. If you haven't listened to that, that's a great episode. And and give a little love to Kyle and RN, I guess, from the Rewind on SmackDraw.
Bobby Mack.
Oh man, you can follow me on Twitch, but you'll be very bored. You can follow me on Twitter, you might be even more bored. But go to TikTok, and if you want to watch old wrestling clips, I'm on there. Over 2,000 new followers in the past 36 hours. I'm looking to keep gathering that up, try to get to those 10,000 clicks so I can start making some money. So appreciate you guys listening to me on here, putting up with me. The rated Y is, because I just say things. So thanks, everybody.
Miss Siegel?
You can follow me on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram at justagirl918. You can also find something I do on the Botched Twitter, the heel support group with Max and Colby, where I take my awesome wrestling figures and make a little comic with them. We have a new character joining us this week, so I'm pretty excited to get that done. So look for that on Sunday.
Make sure you follow RN at Mr. 8984 and the Kai Tai Show. They host the Rewind in UWO here on the SmackDraw Podcast Network. Follow MATTRIDDER Matt Ritter. Follow Katie Kinsey Baby Wrestling, Katie Wrestling. Follow Ted the Hillbilly Hill, the Hill Truth Podcast. Follow the Yellow Shoe Guy. Follow Marie Shadows. Follow all my friends. But
Follow Marie.
Follow everyone. But now as we close another episode of Botch Spots and Chair Shots, I want to take a minute and thank you for listening. Remind you to go wherever you do anything on the internet. Like, follow, subscribe, unsubscribe, then subscribe again. Leave a comment telling me how great I am or how terrible we sound. Either way, it helps the algorithm and it helps find new listeners. If you're feeling really generous to be one of the VIP people, head over to patreon.com and donate to the SmackDraw Podcast Network. You get some fantastic swag. We get some fantastic guests. It's a win-win. For BC Hunter of Wrestling with the Truth, for Ted the Hillbilly Hill of the Hill Truth Podcast, for the Yellow Shoe Guy, and for the boss bitch Miss Alison Siegel, I am the Will Gray. Thanks for stopping by and listening, my people.
Thank you.